Hey, good evening, everybody. Glad you are with me. It is the 22nd of May. We are on day 28 of the Chad Daybell trial. I'm Nate Eaton. This is Courtroom Insider coming to you live from Boise, Idaho, where we had another eventful day in this trial, and the end is in sight. John Pryor today says he is prepared to rest. He did not rest today, but he said during a hearing at the end of the day, a kind of a unusual type of hearing because we didn't know about it, and then it happened, and we were running up to the courtroom to try to get in, but it was live streamed, and we'll talk about what happened at that hearing. Pretty interesting stuff, but at that hearing, John Pryor did say that he is prepared to rest. I gotta admit something to you, though. This shirt, this side is buttoned down. I buy the button-down shirts as often as I can to keep them crisp. Somewhere, somehow today, the button on this side popped off. So all day I've been dealing with one loose, one down. So I'm going to keep it tight. Just going to be full disclosure with you so you don't have to email me. Let me know where you're watching from if you have any questions. We're always monitoring the questions. You come up with some really good ones. You all are so smart. And I appreciate you being here with us tonight. We have a lot to talk about today. DNA, data, and Emma's words. Who is this Emma I'm speaking of? Well, remember on Monday, Emma Daybell took the stand, Chad Daybell's daughter. There's some questions about what she said during her testimony, and the prosecutors brought it up today. And there's a chance we might be hearing from Emma Daybell again on the stand. We'll talk about that. I'll play you the clip. We'll also talk about the witnesses. Patrick Eller, he's a data guy, like an analysis, very talented resume. I got to tell you, he worked for the Army doing data analysis. He's been in law enforcement. He runs a company now out of Richmond, Virginia. He's the CEO of Metadata Forensics. So we'll talk a little bit about what he had to say. And Dr. Greg Hampikian, local guy here just down the street at Boise State University, who has done a lot with forensic DNA testing. He's testified at court cases kind of all over the world. He said he's done a couple of cases overseas. Played a big part in Christopher Tapp, that case in Idaho Falls, if you're from eastern Idaho. I mentioned the questions about Emma's testimony. We'll talk about that. And what happens now? We're done with defense witnesses. I want to walk you through kind of the process as to what we can expect going forward. Court will be held tomorrow. And then what? We'll talk about that. We'll remember JJ, Tylee, and Tammy. And then again, I mentioned that we have your questions, and I want to be sure we answer those. So why don't we jump right into it? The first witness on the stand, this is not a doctor. He's not a doctor. This is Patrick Eller. He's the CEO, as I mentioned, of Metadata Forensics. He basically said that their job, what he does is, if you were to compare data to an iceberg, you and I, the common folk, we're able to obtain or look at the 10%, the tip of the iceberg. Their job focuses on the 90%, what's underneath the iceberg, the data that is stored in the cloud or in the Google history or geolocation or however you want to describe it. He said the best way to get your data is directly from your phone. If you want data on info on somebody, this is the best source. And from there, you can branch out to the cloud, to what Google stores, to what Apple stores, and that's what he did. Now, he did say that the average person, if you wanted to disable your geolocation search on your device, you could. You could pull it out, you could go in, you could figure out the settings, you could. There are often a lot of settings, though, because, I don't know if you've noticed this, I might have geolocation turned off on my phone, but when I go to Google to search for the closest Office Max, it will say, do you want to enable location services? And I may hit yes, and then it will likely track me, unless I hit no and it won't. But the bottom line is he did say, Mr. Eller testified, that people can turn it all off if you know how, or the simplest manner to stop your data from being stored and tracked is to just shut your phone off. Just shut the device off. If you shut the device off, you're not going to be tracked, and it stops following you, stops following your device. Now, Patrick Eller, this witness, was hired by the defense. Remember that. So he's getting paid by the defense to come in and offer his expert witness. He reviewed the testimony of Detective David Stubbs with Rexburg Police, who is the one who, if you recall, obtained those warrants from Google to go through all the data on the Alex Cox's devices and other devices. He also reviewed the testimony of Nick Balance, who the FBI guy who really did a deep dive on all the stuff. In fact, this guy, Patrick Eller, said that he reviewed 10 terabytes of data, or was given 10 terabytes of data from the defense. It's hard to even describe how much data that is, but the way he described it is, let's say you take the Library of Congress and you review all that data, that's 1 terabyte. So take the Library of Congress times 10. That's how much data he was looking at. He also reviewed the testimony of Detective Stubbs and FBI agent Balance. He reviewed their testimonies and then he compared it to his findings. One of the key things that we've heard all along is that there was a lot of movement from Alex Cox. A lot of calls, a lot of texts, a lot of tracking of where he was, because he did not shut off his geolocation. It was on. And so that's why we have such a vivid picture of what he was doing on days and nights and times and all that. Chad Daybell had his off. So it's interesting that Chad Daybell had his off. Here is what Patrick Eller said about that.
Did you recall any comments, or do you recall any testimony as to whether or not there was any ID or information to suggest on 9/9 Chad Daybell's phone was also part of the location data?
I do not recall hearing that it was. What I recall from the testimony was the results of the Google search.
Objection, non-responsive. Overruled.
Go ahead, officer.
The results of the Google search showed that the only device that they were able to place with the association at the Chad Daybell residence was that of Alex Cox.
And that was at 9/9 of 2019?
That is correct.
So what we're saying is that on 9/9 of 2019, with all of this information from, and again, what was the starting time of this again?
On this
On
particular,
9/9, the earliest location information?
I
Do you
believe it was 9/19.
Okay.
It's at the top, but
And then this went well through 11:58 or 12 o'clock that day at the very bottom of the screen. Is that right?
yeah, well, this is not in chronological order. So I can't tell you the exact final time, but it was, yeah, sometime after 12 o'clock.
Okay, you catch that? So 9/9 of 2019, the day that Tylee Ryan was buried there at Chad's house, there was no data for Chad Daybell's device, but there was a lot for Alex Cox, and they went through that. We've heard the testimony before about Alex Cox's device, and we heard it again today. Now, one of the things that Mr. Eller said is that there were 19 devices from Google within 250 meters of the home on 9/9. He didn't really get into specifics as far as where these devices could have come from, but it's likely within 250 meters of that house. It's a busy road on a highway. If you're driving through and you stop at that light, you're driving through and you stop. There's Wi-Fi on the neighbors' houses. It's likely that some of those devices could be there. And he talked about testing those devices to find out who it is. Now, the bottom line, he said it there, and he'll say it again. Chad Daybell's device did not register at that property on either that day or the day that JJ was buried. No registration that Chad Daybell's phone was there. No location. We don't know if perhaps it was picked up somewhere else. If it was, they didn't say. But there was just no geolocation that Chad was there. Could his phone have been off? Absolutely. Absolutely. And, or could everything have been disabled? Sure. Yeah. But it wasn't the case. Here's a little bit more on what he said, Mr. Keller.
You would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
So there were to be 10 other devices that were not included for information to obtain. Would that be fair?
That's correct.
But there were how many, if you could count for me in the green, that they decided to do for further inquiry?
On this particular day, based on what I'm seeing on the screen, there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
So if I understand correctly, there were 16 devices that indicated phone location data at or near the Daybell property on the 23rd of September. Is that correct?
Adding in yes, that's correct.
That would include Alex Cox's phone data at that point, correct?
That's correct.
Did at any point you take the task of narrowing the radius to try to what I'm not sure what the proper word is, narrowing the radius to maybe exclude others that were not as close?
Yes, and I correct that. Including Alex Cox, it would be 17.
Okay. So again, did you narrow the radius to maybe refine your results?
I did.
What did you find then?
So as you would see within this chart, if you were to remove the numbers that are more than 10, you would see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh, excuse me. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay, so there'd be 4 devices that once you excluded, and again, the radius that you used to exclude would have been what?
10 meters.
So again, 30 feet from the location point, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so what he's saying is that there were extra devices in the area that were not tested, that were not examined on the critical date of 9/23, the day that JJ was buried. And when you really get down to you could have this 250 meter radius, then you could narrow it down. Basically, it got down to 30 meters of a particular spot on the property. I believe it was near the fire pit. He said that after all this, 4 devices still showed up in all the geolocation data stuff that were not tested. So does that create a doubt in the mind of the jurors that who were these 4? Was it somebody else that came in and maybe assisted Alex Cox? Was it someone just driving by? They didn't flat out say that, but I believe that's what they were saying, is that, or what Pryor was trying to prove, is that there was no sign of Chad, his device. There was a lot of movement with Alex. Who were these other 4 that could have been in the area? And when I say been in the area, they could have, like I said, been driving through and it registered for a second and then off they go. Or they go and it sits there stationary for 10 minutes, an hour, however it is. Like with Alex Cox, he laid out that there was movement on the property and it might pick up here at 10:42 and then here at 10:47. Well, what happened during that 5 minutes? Did he sit still or did he go elsewhere? The data just isn't that specific to track second by second by second. On October 19th, the day Tammy died, there was no device. Alex's device was not within 1.4 miles of Chad's property that evening. But remember, it was at the church that evening, which is a little over 1.4 miles. I think it's 2 miles. So, and again, this is another thing where Alex could have simply left the phone in the truck and turned it off in his car, or turned it off, or let it sit. And the other data guys went through this. Nick Balance went through this, that it picked up at the church. There was movement all over the church, both sides of the church, not necessarily inside the church, but both sides. And then it stopped for a period of time. I don't remember the exact amount. And then it picked up again when Alex's device was on Highway 20 heading toward Idaho Falls. So there was a gap of time there. Now, Rob Wood got up on cross to ask Mr. Keller about that raccoon text. You know that raccoon text that Chad sent? And while there may not have been cell phone activity registered to his device that morning, according to a text that Chad Daybell sent, he was out on the property that morning burning debris, burning limbs before the rain was coming. Remember that? He shot the raccoon. He explained what he did with his wife that morning, was able to send a text from somewhere, yet there's no data about where that was sent from or where he was that morning. So while the data may not have picked it up, there is a text message already admitted into evidence that says what he was apparently doing that morning. Here's some of the cross from Rob Wood.
Can you tell us approximately which devices you reviewed?
Oh,
Is it too large of a number?
it's a large list. I mean, it was almost 10 terabytes of data that was turned over.
Okay. Yeah,
And
massive undertaking, correct?
yes, absolutely.
And it's difficult for any one person to get through all of that material, correct?
I spent a lot of late nights over Christmas going through data that was turned over. Yes.
Did you review a cell phone belonging to Tammy Daybell?
I don't remember at this time.
Okay, that's fine. You talked about not having any information, any geolocation data from Chad Daybell that placed him on the property, correct?
That's correct.
Are you aware that he sent a text to his wife that placed him on the property?
Yes, but that doesn't place him on the property.
Are you aware that in his text, he talks about burning limbs in a fire pit?
Yes.
And are you aware that he talks about shooting a raccoon
Yes.
and that he talks about burying it in a pet cemetery?
Yes.
And are you aware that there was a pet cemetery on his property?
Yes.
And are you aware that that pet cemetery is the same location that Tylee Ryan was located?
Yes.
So there was the answer to the question about the text and whatnot. And while they may not have had the data from Chad Daybell's cell phone, what this witness did is he kind of basically backed up what the casting guy did, a lot of the cast technology. Now, again, this is a private firm. Cast, the cellular analysis guy who works, their company only provides services for law enforcement. And so it's not like you or me could call them up and say, I want to do the exact same thing you did, but you could get the parts. From what I understand, you can get the parts and create your own testing for that, and then you could see if your data matches their data. So those were kind of the takeaways. You can go back and watch the entire testimony if you want from Patrick Eller. Again, it's a lot of the cell phone tracking of Alex Cox, and the big takeaway, the big headline is nothing. We don't have any Chad Daybell data. The next witness was Dr. Greg Hampikian. Now, this is a very, very smart man. Here's a picture of him in his lab. He works at the Boise State University in the forensic biology department. He's the he's the co-director for the Idaho Innocence Project. He helped on the Amanda Knox case. He helped on other cases. He helped free Christopher Tapp, as I mentioned earlier. So this guy knows his stuff about DNA, and he gets really excited about it. He's a great interview. I've spoken with him before. And a lot of the beginning of his testimony with John Pryor was establishing his background and establishing where DNA can be left. The fact that DNA can be left in our fingerprints, if touching the microphone, or our saliva, or our hair. DNA can even be, he said, within the past 3 to 4 years, they're starting to determine it could be in our breath, that you can collect molecules when you breathe out and possibly trace DNA back to that. one of the main parts of his testimony was hair, the hair roots of that were tested. There was a lot of hairs tested. We knew that, but 4 hairs specifically that were found on the tape around JJ, the adhesive, 4 hairs specifically were tested, and they were sent away for testing. And then Dr. Hampikian here was able to analyze what was found, and here's what he said about those 4 hairs. Again, if you're looking for a bombshell, that word is so overused. If you're looking for a smoking gun of, oh my gosh, it was all Chad Daybell's hair, it wasn't. It wasn't. The prosecutor obviously would have brought that in if it was. But here's what he said about the hair that was tested.
What hypothesis in this case are they testing?
Did Lori Vallow contribute the hair? Did Chad Daybell contribute the hair? Did JJ contribute the hair? So they tested 3 hypotheses, and in each case got a negative, a valid, very sensitive and correct answer that none of those people contributed those hairs. So that's how negative is used in that setting.
Is it used in other settings as well?
Yeah, and like I said, it's a tricky term the way people use it. So
Would it be fair to say that in this particular case, there's an absence of Mr. Daybell's DNA on any of the items that you reviewed?
yes, there's an absence of his evidence, of his sample, of his DNA.
And before we finish up, I would just like to touch on the fact that were the results that you reviewed in this case, were they valid?
Yeah, we check all their controls. And so they, anytime the lab's running a bunch of tests, they have some blank tubes with just the chemicals to make sure nobody's skin cells from the lab or the police got in there or whatever. And so the controls that we use in this case were standard controls at all 3 labs, and they all were okay. They were fine controls. So that's trustworthy.
They follow the proper testing procedures.
They follow the proper procedures, and they got good results with their controls.
Okay, so bottom line, again, we kind of knew this, but Pryor's obviously going to try to really push this home to the jurors that Chad Daybell's DNA was not found anywhere on the bodies of JJ, the remains of Tylee, that even on those tools that they talked a lot about, Tylee Ryan's DNA was found on there, but not Chad Daybell's. But all the tools weren't tested, and the other thing is you would expect Chad Daybell's DNA to be on his tools. My DNA is all over the tools in my yard, in my garage, on my lawnmower, on all that. So it wouldn't be a shocker if it came back and said, yeah, Chad Daybell's DNA is on these tools. Now, if Chad Daybell's DNA had been on JJ's body, under his fingernails, whatever, then that would be news, but it wasn't. And that's kind of Greg Hampikian took the stand to drill that point home. After he testified, and again, you can listen to his whole testimony. We've got the whole thing on our YouTube channel, and you can go listen to it and hear what he had to say. This was defense witness number 9, I believe, or 10. I've had to start a whole new notebook because I filled up my other one. The judge said that there was going to be a scheduling discussion with the jury and the attorneys, but that that court was done for the day and the public could leave. So we all left, and then we several of us reporters kind of hung around up on the top floor of the courthouse chatting, and this was around like 1:30, so it was early, and then went outside, and I was doing some stuff when all of a sudden I get a message that court's back in session and that the live stream's going. And luckily, our team at East Idaho News, Jordan, had kept the live stream going inadvertently, thinking that court would end at 3:30. He was busy packing T-shirts for you all. And so I look on my phone. I'm like, sure enough, they're in court. But the judge said we were done. What in the world? So I go running inside, go through security, take off my belt, do all that stuff. Always have your keys out on top of your bag. Go up to the 4th floor where there's a bunch of several other people and reporters that are up there, and they weren't letting us in the courtroom. Apparently, what happened is that they had the meeting with the jury about scheduling, and from what we're told, this motion in limine, I mean, like motion right now, came up by the prosecutors. And so the judge said to be efficient with time and for security purposes, because Chad Daybell was in the courtroom, but there weren't security bailiffs or enough to secure him and the public. The judge said, we'll just do it on the live stream. I kind of have mixed feelings about that. I'm glad that it was televised and that we could see it. I wish that there would have been a little bit of notice. I understand these things happen, but, you know, it's a public courtroom, and it would have been nice to be in there for it. That being said, I did watch it. I did listen to the hearing. It was about 30 minutes. We're posting the whole thing. The whole issue is that the prosecution has issue with something Emma Murray said. But it really goes back to Janice Olson, a woman who, if you remember early on in the trial, I don't even remember when, like week number 1, I think, beginning of April, the prosecutors wanted to admit a statement that Janice Olson heard Tammy Daybell talk about her husband. Tammy Daybell apparently said, my husband wants me to up my life insurance before I retire, something like that. The judge said it couldn't be admitted at that point, I believe because it was hearsay, but that it could, if the issue came up later on in the trial, it could be. Well, now the prosecution was saying, all right, judge, it came up. Emma Murray the other day brought it up during her testimony that when she said that she sat with her mom and they filled out the life insurance forms without consulting with their husbands. Then the prosecutor showed that Chad Daybell had signed the form on a Sunday. So here is Rocky Wixom's argument to the judge as to why this issue should be allowed back in, and this witness, what she overheard Tammy say, should be allowed in.
So, Judge, the proposed statement that we would intend to admit would come from Ms. Olson testifying, and we believe she would testify to the effect of, quote, she'd just say, I think she's referencing Tammy, she'd just say, my husband thinks I should up my insurance here at the end of my career. You know, before I retire, he's thinking I should up my insurance.
Okay, thank you.
You betcha, Your Honor. So back to that, Judge. We know that there's an admitted exhibit now where, in fact, an application was submitted, insurance was upped, and approximately 5 to 6 weeks after that, Tammy was dead. So the court had originally denied our request to have that admitted through Ms. Olson. What's changed from the state's perspective, Your Honor, now is that yesterday, I think is Monday, when Emma Daybell was called. She was questioned by the defense, specifically asked a couple of questions that have been included on the transcript that we have attached to our motion. And in that transcript, it demonstrates for the court that defense counsel asked Emma about the meeting that both Emma and Tammy had with, I believe it was Taylor Ballard from the insurance company that year, about the benefits. And he asked her a couple of times, very specifically, whether or not she knew if her mother had any conversations with her husband about increasing the insurance. I believe that was asked twice. I'm referencing page 4 and 5 of the partial transcript. Excuse me. The question was, beginning at line 7 on page 4, are you aware as to whether or not your mother consulted with the insurance company, with your father, prior to upping her insurance on that meeting day with Taylor Ballard? Ms. Blake objected, called for speculation. The court overruled. And then Mr. Pryor again asked, are you aware of whether or not your mother consulted with your father on that day to up her insurance? Ms. Blake objected as to hearsay. It was overruled. And then Mr. Pryor indicated that there could be an answer. Emma said, we were sitting at a table and filled out the paperwork together. We both signed to take out more life insurance on ourselves, and we did not consult with our husbands. Next question, at that point, did you take up the maximum amount of insurance that you could purchase at that point? Emma answered, I did not, because I could not afford it. I later did. Next question, okay, at the next period. Answer, yes. Last question from Mr. Pryor on this issue. But it's your understanding that without discussing it with your father, your mother elected to up her insurance to the maximum amount. Her answer was, I saw her check that box on the paper. So, Your Honor, the state believes that the defense has effectively opened the door to the relevancy of whether or not Tammy did in fact talk to her husband about the need to up the insurance. We believe that it's now relevant. We believe, like we had noted in our motion before, her statements would come in over any hearsay objection under Rule 803(3) as a state of mind exception. And certainly they've already been allowed to be testified to. That this issue has been testified to now by the defense. So there won't be any prejudice against the defense in trying to match the evidence because they've already introduced evidence on the issue and called a witness and questioned her about it. So without belaboring it further, Judge, unless you have questions, we do believe that it's now, the door's been opened and the state should be allowed to offer the evidence.
Okay, so did you get that? They're saying that because Emma Murray opened the door when she talked about, when the defense asked her about the life insurance, filling out the form and all that, that now, because of that, how Emma testified directly saying we did not consult with our husbands about that form, that she opened the door to the conversation, and the prosecution has a witness who apparently heard Tammy say, my husband wants me to up my life insurance before I retire. They want to bring this witness up and put her on. John Pryor does not agree that it should happen, and here is what he said.
Judge, there is opposition, Judge, and the context of that is simply the words at the very end, before I retire. And if we're going to engage in this situation where we're going to be able to recall witnesses so that they can start muddying the waters and creating a confusion that at some point Chad Daybell talked to Tammy about upping her insurance before she retires. There was no indication of when she was going to retire, how she was going to retire. And quite frankly, Judge, I don't think this falls under the state of mind exception to the hearsay rule. And the fact is that it wasn't at the present state of mind, and there is no indication from that statement that the insurance was going to be upped on that particular cycle. There is no indication when she was going to do it. And even, I question whether that comment or that discussion ever took place, but that's for cross-examination. Should the court even consider allowing this? But Judge, if we're going to start engaging in a policy where we're going to start saying the state, because now there's one minute statement that seems to suggest something other than what they're saying, and that's going to allow them to reopen, you're going to open the door to the state coming back and basically relitigating their case for another, 2 or 3, 4 days, going every little statement that they think they can gain some mileage by doing this. And it is not a definitive statement. And I think the court properly noted that when it said, listen, read the entire statement in its context. Before I retire.
So Pryor's saying that she shouldn't be allowed in. Well, guess what? The judge said she can. It can come in. And that will likely happen with rebuttal witnesses. Now, there's a couple of other things we learned from this hearing. The prosecution wanted to make the judge aware of 2 law enforcement officers, Detective Hermosillo and Coulter Cannon, that they would like to call them as rebuttal witnesses. They did say that Ray Hermosillo was released from his subpoena, and the defense agreed, but they want to call Hermosillo back on. They said that Detective Hermosillo has been very diligent on not listening to any of the trial, not reading coverage, not watching, and that they trust him. They also made the point that last year he was the agent officer in Lori Vallow's trial, so he sat through that entire thing. So he's heard almost all of this stuff. The other is Coulter Cannon, the deputy in Fremont, who that was brought up during Joseph Murray's testimony that when he responded to the house at the night of the shooting and whatnot, they also want to bring him back on. And the judge said, all right, well, you can, but if the defense objects when you call them, I'll take that up as things happen. If there's an objection, we'll take it up. So what is all this talk about more witnesses when you're saying, wait, I thought that the defense was done and we were going to move on to the verdict? Well, there are deliberations. The prosecution said that they have, according to Rocky Wixom, 1.5 to 2 days of rebuttal witnesses. Because it is their case, they get rebuttal witnesses. So we still have at least 1.5 to 2 days of rebuttal witnesses before this jury gets it. And a couple of other nuggets we learned. John Pryor says he's prepared to rest, and that I think those were the main ones. Those were the main ones, that they have a 1.5 to 2 days of rebuttal witnesses, and Pryor's prepared to rest. So what's next? So I think that tomorrow will be a shorter day. I think that the defense will likely rest, and then it's possible that the judge goes through the jury instructions. He said this before, that they need to go through the jury instructions to make sure everyone's on the same page. That happened in Lori Vallow's case. It took about 2 hours. And he needs to make sure all of the exhibits are numbered. And that could take a little bit more time. It seems like this case had a little bit more because the defense had their own exhibits, whereas Lori Vallow's case, the defense didn't have any exhibits. So they have to do some administrative type work. Whether that happens tomorrow, I don't know. I don't know if it'll happen Friday. We're going into a holiday weekend. It is a busy time of year. There's graduations. There's a lot happening. I could see, maybe the defense rests tomorrow and then we're back Tuesday after Memorial Day weekend. And then you have to think, okay, there's still 1.5 to 2 days of rebuttal witnesses. So let's say that happens Tuesday, Wednesday. Does the defense get rebuttal witnesses? No. They don't get more witnesses, but they can cross-examine those witnesses. And those rebuttal witnesses must stick to what was done in the defense side. It's not like they can introduce all new topics. It has to be responding to what was said during the defense portion of the case. So, that makes sense? That's what will happen next. So again, I think tomorrow will probably be a shorter day. I don't think we're going to see these rebuttal witnesses tomorrow. I think that will be later on. And then, after all that, there'll be closing arguments. The prosecution will get time for closings. The defense will then get time for closings. And then the prosecution, because again, it's their case, will get one more shot at a closing. And how it worked last year is the prosecution, I think, took 1 hour and 15 minutes. The defense took about an hour. Then the prosecution went back for like 20 minutes. Then it goes to the jury. And then the jury deliberates. And then if the jury finds that Chad Daybell was guilty, and he was guilty of first-degree murder with aggravating factors. What are those aggravating factors? We've talked about this before. Sorry for those of you that know it. Aggravating factors include there was more than one death. Check mark on this case. The deaths were extremely heinous. Check mark on this case. The death was a police officer. That doesn't apply here. The death was an inmate. If an inmate is killed in prison, that's an aggravating factor. Idaho law lays out all of the aggravating factors. And there are some aggravating factors, if he's found guilty, that apply here. The jury would have to say, yes, it applies here. They would come back with a verdict. If it's guilty, we then go into the penalty phase of the case, where we will hear more witnesses. Witnesses arguing that Chad Daybell should live, probably his children. Witnesses arguing that Chad Daybell should die. Witnesses not necessarily arguing either side, but giving victim impact statements, like what we had at Lori Vallow's trial. Remember that? Kay Woodcock spoke, Vicky spoke, Samantha Gawillam spoke. We had other people that spoke and talked about how this has impacted them. They could speak. They could submit letters that the judge reads, that the jury could read. Then the jury will deliberate again and to come back with an actual penalty of life or death. You got all that? It's fascinating, to be honest with you, to kind of witness all of this, because the last time Idaho had an actual somebody sentenced to death was 2017. So it's been some years. I personally have never covered an actual death penalty case from start to finish. I've covered the execution, not here, but in Virginia, the execution of the DC sniper If you remember in the early 2000s, there was a man, people were just being shot and killed randomly in the Virginia, Maryland, DC metro area. They'd be leaving a restaurant and they would be shot and killed, or someone would be pumping gas and they'd be shot and killed. And it turns out John Allen Muhammad was shooting people out of the back of his trunk, and he had an 18-year-old with him who was kind of his partner in crime, you could say. They finally arrested John Allen Muhammad, and he was sentenced to death. And I covered his execution in November of 2015, I believe, or maybe it was October. I interviewed his, this is way off on a tangent, I interviewed his ex-wife before the execution, and the first victim who John Allen Muhammad tried to kill, who had never spoken publicly, but the guy survived. He was leaving a pizza place when he was shot. He survived the shooting. We found him in the middle of rural Virginia and interviewed him. Anyway, side note, that's way off the topic. Then if Chad Daybell's sentenced to death, because so many of you have asked, like, will he die within 42 days? Will he die within 60 days? No, not here, not in Idaho. There'll be appeals, there'll be appeals, there'll be appeals. And the appeals could last for 10 or 20 or 30 years. It's very well likely that he would die in prison on death row before being executed. Right now, executions are kind of on hold in our state because a few weeks ago they tried to execute a guy after multiple appeals, Creech. They went in and they couldn't get a vein, this elderly man. And now they're trying to figure out what to do next with him because the legislature here did authorize firing squad as a way to execute people, but there's no facility to do it. So that's kind of where things stand now. So I predict we're probably still at this for another at least week, maybe 2 weeks. But we're going into a new phase. The defense is, excuse me, the defense is pretty much done. And the next few days will be interesting. Tomorrow, the judge said we will meet at 8:30 to go over scheduling. So he'll probably announce some scheduling issues with the public and let people know what's coming up. And then the Memorial Day weekend really kind of throws everybody because there is no court on Monday. And, the judge, I'm sure, does not want to have the jury deliberating before a 3-day weekend. And we kind of thank him for that so that we can go home and be with our families. Before we go, speaking of family, look at these adorable photos of JJ and Tylee. Just shining, just beams of goodness. And tonight we remember them and we remember Tammy. Tammy had some extended family members there today, including her cousin Patty, who testified earlier in the trial. They taught school together at the same school, remember that? And they lived near each other and they just loved having fun together. So we remember Tammy as well as JJ and Tylee and as well as Charles. And hopefully we can think of them often as we go throughout this trial, even though we're going on, nearly 8 weeks now. I do want to give you all a t-shirt update. Many of you ordered our life goal, keep my mugshot off East Idaho News t-shirts. Well, guess what? You're starting to get them. Look at this photo I got today from Steve and Brenda Jones. They live here in Idaho. They're sporting their shirts. I love it. When you get your shirts, if you ordered them, please send me a photo. I want to feature some every night here on Courtroom Insider. And they sent me the nicest email. They're, as far as I know, they're the first people that have sent me an email who have received their shirts. But take a look at this. That is our car full of about half the shirts that have been packaged up and shipped. So I promise they're on their way. We have a small team. We're doing this all. And I do want to show you a photo of Caitlin. Caitlin is a intern who's been helping us out. I have to give her a shout out because she's been doing this pretty much since Monday. She graduated Tuesday from high school yesterday, and she's still been coming in to help us. And she is the one that's making it possible for all of you to get your shirts. So shout out to Caitlin. There she is. There's boxes and boxes of shirts. She's making it happen. So you can thank her when you get your shirts. I know many of you are asking if shirts are still available. I believe after we get all of these packaged, we may have some extra. So we'll open up the sales again before we So you can buy one if you want one. So there you go. That's it for that. Let's get to your questions and shout outs. I want to be sure I got to everything now. Pretty sure I did. Okay. Are you ready? Met some nice people today at the courthouse. I was telling some of the regulars that are in line every day that I wish I would have. I should have thought about this. Every day, taken a picture of the line from day one and show you the progression throughout. And some days it goes up and some days it goes down as far as the number of people there. But anyway, shout outs for today. Here we go. Sue-Ann Weeks. Sorry, Sue-Ann. Tammy Moyer, Sherry Goodell. Jan Hoopal watches every night while doing dialysis. Jane Hoopal. Jane, sending you all our love and thank you so much for watching. Tim Correa in Vance and Ellen Sturgeon in Albuquerque. Susan Platt, Annie from Glasgow, Scotland. Wouldn't it be nice if we could all go to Scotland? I hear it's beautiful. I'd love to visit. Sherry and Tina from Tennessee. Robert and Melissa Davis, I feel like you're the other man in my house, Nate. My wife, Melissa Davis, watches every report and everything you've done for the Daybell trial. It's Nate this and Nate that. She loves your insight and loves that you include everyone around you. Keep up the great work. Oh, thank you, Robert and Melissa. Hi, Melissa. Thank you. Good seeing you. Denise Oliver, Irish McLars, Diane Dills, and Shanna wants a shout out to her sister, Sally Claire. She's followed the story from the beginning. Thank you so much, Sally Claire and Shanna. Ellen Casalino and Joni Hernandez. Thank you all. Because you watch, I have a job. It's the truth. If no one watched, I'd have to do something different. So thank you for keeping me employed. Okay. Follow up. Yesterday, remember I read the email from Joe who said that I believe she couldn't figure out every time she joined in Courtroom Insider, it'd be late. Well, Joe, if you log on, or if any of you watching log on, and we've already started on YouTube, you can rewind all the way to the beginning. Remember, there's 2 minutes of countdown at the beginning, so if you're 2 minutes late, that's okay. But you can rewind it and watch it even while we're live. And I believe Facebook allows you to do the same. If it doesn't, you can hop over to YouTube. So just so you know, you can fast forward the countdown clock and start right when we start. I hope that works. Heather, will you tell us about your opinion, hunches, when things became clear to you? What was a red herring for you? Oh, man. Well, Heather, when the kids were missing, I did think that they might be alive. But I don't know. That's a big question. There's a lot there. And maybe one day I will, but I don't think, I mean, I have opinions on some of it and some of the people, but I don't know. I maybe one day I will. Sorry, I'm not really answering your questions. Hunches. I always try to be pretty open-minded about everything, I think, or almost everything. And believe that, there's so much more we don't know, and that if we rush to judgment, it can get us in trouble. And so I think maybe one day I'll sort it out. I guess I need more specific questions than that. That is a good question, though. Angel says, years back, I remember hearing that Chad had claimed Tammy had fainted during a temple session a few days before she died. I was waiting for Emma to bring it up in her testimony in order to prove her mother was sick. I'm wondering if that fainting story was proven to be a lie. Have you heard anything about it? It's been brought up a time or two in this trial about Tammy fainting at the temple, but I think Pryor's brought it up on cross, or on direct questioning maybe, and I don't believe any witnesses have actually said, yes, she did faint in the temple, or yes, I was aware that she fainted in the temple. But I have heard that before, that she passed out after she had been kneeling or standing for so long. I don't remember the exact word or what she was doing. Susan said, can Chad take a plea deal anytime he wants, even though it's getting close to the end, or is there a statute of limitation on that? There's not a statute of limitation on it. It would have to be if the prosecutors would be open to it. So that's a great question. You know, what if tomorrow Chad Daybell came in and said, okay, I want to plead guilty. I realize all this evidence against me. I realize that I could be facing the death penalty. Give me life in prison and we won't have the jury deliberate. I don't know if the prosecution would be open to that. It's probably the safe thing to do for them and probably would save the stress of, oh no, what's it going to be? And probably would help on appeals. If you can get someone in a plea agreement to plead guilty, the appeal process is far less strenuous and lengthy than someone who's found guilty by jury. Would Chad do it at this point? I don't know. Nate, will Chad Daybell take the stand? I'm dying to hear from him. I doubt Chad Daybell takes the stand. John Pryor says he's prepared to rest. There's been no indication that he will take the stand. At least in Lori's case, there was a little hubbub. There was a little, was she going to take the stand? And Jim Archibald even said, we don't know. That's a decision we'll make once the prosecution rests. And if you recall, when it was time for the defense to take over their case, Jim Archibald asked for some privacy to be with his client, with John Thomas. The judge cleared the courtroom. It was just the three of them in the courtroom. And maybe security too, and they got down to it. They said, Lori, are you going to testify or not? And she said, I'm not going to testify. And that was a decision that I understand was made at that moment. Like that morning, she could have testified, and she decided not to. I don't think that's happening with Chad Daybell. But boy, wouldn't it be amazing if he could take the stand and answer those questions and have the prosecution grill him. It'd be something. But I don't foresee it. Watch, tomorrow he takes the stand. He's not. Don't come to the courthouse tomorrow. He's not going to take the stand, as far as I know. I'm sure all the watchers and listeners wonder what goes on in those sidebars. Are those conversations ever a part of the court transcript, or are those kept confidential? For the most part, they're kept confidential. There's no court reporter there, but some of them, the judge will say, court reporter, can you come with me? Or the reporter will say, do you need me, judge? And that could happen, but most are private. And I think it'd be awesome if if we could hear it or listen to it to hear what they're talking about, especially the ones when they go back in chambers, but we'll probably never know. Susan says, I read that one. Donna from Reno, was Chad ever asked where he was when the children were being buried in his backyard? Did he ever give an answer? That's a great question, Donna. Chad never spoke to the investigators. Chad got an attorney early on. Chad, as far as we know, the only thing he's answered to anyone about where the children is, they are safe. Emma Daybell testified to that the other day. If I ever get to talk to him, I'll ask him, where were you on that morning of September 9th and September 23rd? But no, there's no police recording. There's no interrogation video. There's no come to Jesus moment where the police approach him. We have him in the backseat of that car when he's talking to Emma. But that's it. And he lawyered up all the other times, as far as I understand. And that's, we may never know what he would say where he was that morning. Jody says, what happens if the defense rests tomorrow before a long weekend? Would they send jurors home or keep them? They would send them home. The jurors are not being sequestered. So the jurors get to go home every night. They wouldn't be sequestered until the penalty phase about when they decide what punishment, if found guilty, they would face. So they'd go home. I think that's probably what will happen. Everyone will go home, have a couple days to gear up for the big, week or whatever. And then next week we come back and there's closings and all of that stuff. Since the state, Nancy asks, since the state is going to recall Emma, can she talk to Chad before she testifies again? Is Chad still influencing her and her siblings since they testified? I don't believe that they were allowed to talk to Chad. Maybe when their subpoenas were released, they could call him. But that's a good question. And as far as if he's still influencing them, well, listen to their testimonies and decide for yourself. I'll let you decide if you think that he still has an influence on them. It was clear when she said that they've talked almost every day since he was arrested. That might show you kind of what type of influence they have. Jane says supposedly Tammy bruised easily. Wouldn't she have been all bruised up if she tumbled out of bed when she died? Oh, that's a good point. Well, first of all, dead people don't roll out of bed. So, because you can't really bruise when you're dead. You'd have to bruise right before you die. And yeah, if you did fall out of bed and hit the ground or hit a table, you might have a bigger bruise on your arms, maybe on your butt or something, your back, wherever you hit. Good observation. That didn't come out. There was no bruises that matched that. Tim asks, what is your relationship with podcasters and reporters who are covering the case? Have you made friendships? Is there competition for interviews or scoops? How do you all work together? What's been hard for you as a reporter, given the immense amount of coverage, both novice and professional? Oh, wow, that's a good question, Tim. I would say that I can't think of one reporter or podcaster that I've had any issue with. I'm going to be honest. I don't really watch anything anybody else does on this story. I did early on. I watched a lot of what everyone else was doing, and then it would get in my head about, oh, shoot, they did this, or, oh, darn, they did that. Oh, I should do this. And I remember before the trial started with Lori, I just had to tell myself, with some advice from a very good mentor who's in the business, just focus on your work and doing the best you can. And the last thing I want to do at the end of the day is turn on the news and watch more about this story. That being said, I will watch, I work with Dateline, but I watched the 48 hours where they interviewed Chad's kids. That was a big scoop. I've watched some of the 2020s that they've done. I watched Netflix. I was in that for a second or two, but I watched that. I've watched other stuff, but I'm not doing day-to-day stuff. I've made friendships, absolutely. Justin Lum, we talk from Fox in Phoenix. I don't know if he's watching tonight, probably not. But we talk daily. We text daily. I mean, he's one of the only people that really understands kind of what this is like, I guess. That being said, when we get scoops or exclusives, we don't tell each other. It's a weird kind of relationship. Like, hey, man, I'll help you. You help me. But heads up, I got this big interview coming up, and I'm going to drop it. And he's like, oh, or I'm doing this or that. I think that we all work together at East Idaho News. I'm sorry, I'm going through the layers of your question. At East Idaho News, we're kind of open to sharing with any news outlet as long as you give us credit. You can use our video, our helicopter video over the Daybell property. We share. We're not like a traditional news organization where it's like, no, it's ours. No one can use it. Hey, you want to use our stuff? You want to share our stuff? Just give us credit. You can have it. I've become friends with a KTVB reporter out here. I met some new reporters this week from news outlets in Salt Lake City, and exchange numbers, and we'll text and chat. And I think that we all kind of help each other out. Some of the national guys that have swooped in, I haven't really dealt with. But yeah, I hope that answered your question. And by the way, I understand many of you have told me that a lot of podcasters are covering this. I haven't watched any of them. There's one guy, the lawyer who many of you have said has been said some nice things. So thank you, the lawyer and that's flattering. I appreciate that. As far as the immense amount of coverage, what's been hard for me, I really love when I go to court and no one else is there. Like, I love in Fremont County, some of those hearings, I'd show up, I'd be the only reporter there, maybe 2 members of the public, and that was it. Like, I like that because everyone's kind of not as on edge. Like, you can chat with the prosecutors, you can chat with the defense attorney, you can chat with the bailiffs. What's been hard this trial is this gag order, because I want to be able to go up to Rob Wood at lunch and be like, hey, how you doing? How was your lunch? I want to go up to John Pryor, who we run into each other in the bathroom daily during the breaks, and it's like, hi. I want to be able to be like, hey, man, how was your weekend? Which we can do, but I understand that they might not want to talk to reporters. That's been hard, not being able to be my like, hey, how are you? I guess everything else just has come as it goes. So that's a long question to a short answer. Shanna says, do you think the prosecution will bring up the fact that Chad said his children can keep secrets? Chad said, my children are really good at keeping secrets. I think he told Heather Daybell that. I think they might bring it up again, maybe during closing arguments. That was a big line. Ellen says, I'm puzzled as to why we see a lot of the text messages between Lori, Chad, and Alex, but others we only see that there were texts exchanged, including timestamps, but not what the texts say. For example, the days Tylee and JJ were supposedly buried, there are multiple texts between Chad, Alex, and Lori, but no messages were seen. Good observation. They talked about that. Different cell phone companies keep text messages for different amounts of time. Some don't even keep text messages longer than a few days. Also, a lot of it depends on if Lori had it stored in the cloud. If Lori was the originator of the text or was getting texts and that were synced to her iCloud, that's how they got them. If it was Alex and Chad, they really, from what we understand, didn't have like a storage unit. Chad definitely didn't to store all of his texts. So it all depends on what they were able to retrieve and the distance. Sadly, none of the voice calls were recorded because those would have been amazing to listen to. Joni asks, how did the jurors react during today's testimony? Engaged or bored? You know, I saw for the first time one of the jurors appear to me to be visibly annoyed or just really done, wanted to be out of there. She was rolling her eyes, I saw at least once, and was like, come on. My interpretation, I talked to two people next to me, they got the same vibe. Other jurors were taking notes a little bit. They were listening. It's been a long 2 months for them, so I'm sure some are very anxious to get on. I will say, I don't know if I've said this today. There has been one juror, not today, period. There's been one juror who has worn a blue shirt every day for like 4 weeks. And my seatmate and I said, and the guy next to him, they both have been wearing blue shirts like every single day for 4 weeks. And we said they have to have planned it. Like this, there's no way they're not doing this like for fun. Well, today, the guy wore gray. He was not in blue. It was like, what? He's wearing a different color. Anyway, just subtle observations you make about the jurors. I think I said the other night about the guy that shaved his mustache. It's like, whoa, he shaved his mustache. If I get to interview them ever, I'll ask about that. Is it normal for Judge Boyce to dismiss the public audience and keep the jury? What does that mean? Could it mean the defense is ready to rest? I think we talked about that one. It is abnormal for the judge to do that. He hasn't done it yet this trial. But, you know, think about it. It could have been something as, all right, everybody, we're going to discuss some scheduling things here. Does anybody have like a graduation tomorrow night of your kid that you really need to get to, or Friday, you know, maybe personal stuff like that that doesn't necessarily need to be broadcast, televised? How much time does it take after the defense rests for closing arguments to end? Could be a few days. After the defense rests, as I explained, we could have rebuttal witnesses. That could take a few days. So I don't know when, but I would think maybe sometime next week we'll have closing arguments. After closing arguments, is that where the jurors are given the case to deliberate? Will they be sequestered at that point? They will not be sequestered at that point, but they will be together until they need to go home. And then, sorry, dropped my pen. Then they will be sequestered during the penalty phase. All right, I think I got through the questions. I know you have so many more. I'll try to get to them tomorrow. Remember, tomorrow we'll be back at it in the morning at 8:30. I think it will be a shorter day in court tomorrow, so you might just want to watch it from home. And then we will likely not have court Friday, just my guessing, and we'll be back at it Tuesday. So we will do a Courtroom Insider tomorrow night. Not sure about Friday if we don't have court, but might come up with something. But definitely you can stay tuned, follow us. Here's where I'm at: Facebook, Instagram, X, and on East Idaho News YouTube. We also have a little family channel called Meetin' the Eatons. That's at eastidahonews.com. No, that's at youtube.com. And I'm getting a lot of requests for a look at the interview Well, I can't find it, but somebody was asking if you could watch the interview I did with the sniper's victim, and I'm just searching right now if I can find it. I believe that I might have it here. If you want to watch it, if not, here we go. Let me rewind it. Okay, for those of you that want to tune off, you can, but if you want to see the sniper interview I did with the first victim, I'll end with that tonight, and I'll come right back on after this. But here's that story I did. This was from 2011, I believe, or 2009.
5 bullets.
And he recently sat down for an exclusive interview with 8 News reporter Nate Eaton.
This was all bloody and glasses all over the place.
7 years later, Paul LaRufa still can't believe he was the first victim attacked by the DC snipers.
I was scared like everybody else was scared.
It was around 10 p.m. on September 5th, 2002. Paul left his pizzeria in Clinton, Maryland. He put his laptop and cash from the daily sales in the back seat of his car.
I opened this door, sat down. As soon as I shut it, I just looked. I didn't even look to my left. I just felt to my left, flash a light, and the window exploded.
There's been a shooting at Mark Twain restaurant.
2 men in the parking lot called 911
I hope he's not dead. You gotta send him. Stay on the line.
as Paul clung to life.
A guy came out from behind the store and shot Paul LaRufa and
5 bullets pierced his body in his left arm, chest, stomach, diaphragm, and spinal cord.
I don't know if I could say I felt each one, but you know, I felt it happening.
Paramedics rushed him to the hospital with bullet fragments scattered throughout his body.
And they're just right next to my spinal cord, so I missed at least being paralyzed by a quarter of an inch.
Miraculously, Paul was out of the hospital within weeks. Meanwhile, John Allen Muhammad and Lee Malvo were using his money to fund their operation, but Paul had no idea they were the ones who had attacked him.
I was pumping my gas and looking around and ducking like everybody else.
It wasn't until a few weeks after Malvo and Muhammad were caught that Paul learned Malvo had indeed shot him.
It's still shocking then to find out, holy mackerel, that's the guy who shot me.
Paul was called to testify at both of the men's trials and was on the stand as Muhammad acted as his own attorney.
The guy who was responsible for trying to kill me got to ask me questions about, what happened. It was just emotional to see him there, right there.
Since that day, Paul has never seen Muhammad in person and is not attending his execution.
As far as I know, he's never expressed the least bit of remorse about anything. So I think he's just a psychopath.
While Paul has no desire to see Muhammad, he does hope to speak with Malvo one day.
I think it would be interesting to have a victim interview the person who tried to kill him.
Paul has physically recovered from his attack, and psychologically, life gets easier every day. He knows he's lucky to be alive, and his car is a daily reminder of that.
I survived in that car, so it's more of an attachment of a lucky car than an unlucky car.
In Hollywood, Maryland, Nate Eaton, 8 News. All right, there's a little clip from the past. People are messaging me, you look so young. I can't stand how I told that story. I wish I could do it again. Anyway, John Allen Muhammad acted as his own attorney, as you heard there, and he got to question the guy he shot. Can you imagine having to answer questions to the person that shot you? How traumatizing that would be? Like if Chad Daybell was acting as his own attorney. Anyway, so much history there. I'm going to let you go. I hope you have a great night. We'll be back tomorrow night. Thank you so much for watching Courtroom Insider. See you later.